we're looking at osmoregulation in plants to follow on from our osmoregulation mechanisms in animals. Now, osmoregulation refers to the regulation of water balance in organisms. Water balance involves regulating intake and loss of both water and salt. So maintaining water balance is different in aquatic and terrestrial plants, and it also varies between saltwater and freshwater plants. So similar ideas to those with animals. Now, there are many types of plants in various habitats, so it's a really complex issue in plants, and it's hard to cover in one big fell swoop because there are so many different types of plants. Particularly that plants are less mobile, it makes these mechanisms quite difficult. Now, when we're looking at the types of plants, we're specifically looking at xerophytes, and they're the ones that require minimal liquid to survive. So you're talking succulents and cacti. We've got hydrophytes that are wholly or partially submerged in water and wet habitats. We've got halophytes, which are plants that are growing in waters of really high salinity. And we've got the mesophytes, which are kind of those middle ground where the plants are adapted to growing in really well-watered soils. Now, some osmoregulatory issues that face plants, number one is evapotranspiration. So it's the loss of water from the stomata. It's affected by temperature, light intensity, airflow, wind, humidity, soil, water, pretty much everything, right? And plants in different environmental conditions have physically and physiologically adapted to deal with that water loss. So the structure of the plant cell also assists in managing this water storage, remembering that plants have a really large central vacuole, and that's containing a lot of water and other nutrients and everything else that's dissolved into that. And it's also providing the cell with some stability. Number one, it has the water available in case it needs it, and therefore osmotic control can happen a bit more. Now, it also provides that little bit of turgor, so when the vacuole is full, the cell is quite rigid. When it's flaccid, the vacuole loses water and the cell loses rigidity. But there's also that cell wall there. So the uptake of water is really limited by the wall pressure, and it maintains the cell shape when the water is lost. Now, some structural features that are really important when we're talking here might be the stomata, the vacuoles, and the cuticles. We're going to be talking some physiological mechanisms and some homeostatic. But we'll actually be talking about the types of plants rather than breaking this down into the types of adaptations like we have with animals. So each type of plant exhibits multiple adaptations which may fall into any, or sometimes, across these multiple categories here. All right, so with the xerophytes, let's start off with the xerophytes. These are the ones we're talking about here. And most of the structural features of these xerophytes are things that prevent water loss in really hot, dry, windy conditions, or in conditions that have high salinity. So xerophytes include eucalyptus, they have really hard waxy leaves, and beach grasses that have really rolled leaves, so they don't have as much surface area for that evapotranspiration to happen. There's a really thick waxy coating on some of these leaves, and it prevents that water loss through the surface. And water loss occurs through diffusion of the water vapor through the stomata. So in different types of plants, these cam plants here, we're going to call them that to make it a bit easier to say, the stomata only open at night, and that collects the CO2 and stores it as a malic acid in the vacuoles. Now, during the day, it's transported to the chloroplasts and used to produce carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So by storing the carbon dioxide required at night, the plant is able to close its stomata during the heat of the day to reduce water loss, so they can survive in environments of really extreme heat and aridity. So in hot conditions, also some xerophytes will produce a hormone, and that hormone is called abscisic acid, and high levels of this will cause the stomata to close, preventing water loss as well. So there seems to be a bit of a theme running here. Now, cacti are our well-known xerophytes, and this is straight out of Pearson and has a really nice summary of some of those adaptations. Okay, let's talk about hydrophytes. These are, again, these really water immersed kinds of plants. We're talking rice, we're talking water lilies. Generally, these have a reduced or an absent root system, okay? The stems are really flexible and thin, and the water does provide some support for how they grow, right? They're sitting right on top of the water there. Generally, they don't have a very good vascular system. It seems unnecessary if that water can just simply diffuse into the body of the plant. Now, because these are, we've got some floating leaves here, or we might have fully submerged leaves. It really does depend. So generally, these leaves are wide, they're broad, they lie really flat on top of the water to increase their surface area for that photosynthesis, and they have numerous stomata. So they don't really need the guard cells on the upper leaf surface, they're absent on the lower, and they have this constant need to lose water by transpiration and uptake of CO2 for photosynthesis. So there's a lot going on all the time. Now the upper epidermis is going to be really waxy for protection to roll the water off the leaves, and that helps the transpiration and prevents algae growth. Now those ones that have fully submerged leaves in an aquatic environment usually have really thin, and they're divided to create really large surface area for direct absorption of nutrients and gases and photosynthesis and stuff like that. So stomata might be absent, as the gas is exchanged directly with the water, and they might have a waxy cuticle, they might have a few air pockets to prevent the leaf from actually rising to the water surface as well. Okay, some homeostatic mechanisms that appear in plants are quite tricky. We've mentioned this abscisic acid, this hormone. It was originally believed to be, a part of this process called abscission, which is how it's received its name, but it's now known that it's only really appearing in a few small numbers of plants. So it's a signal that plays an important role in terms of what the cell needs to be doing. In some plants, the receptors in the roots respond to the drying out in the soil by releasing this abscisic acid into the xylem tissue, and also causes the dropping off of flowers or immature fruits and leaves. So it has a lot of different roles, and we could go on for quite a long time because it has so many different bits and pieces associated with it. Right, so there's quite a number of mechanisms here, and I would really encourage you to go and do some reading here because this can be quite a complex topic.